Hello and welcome back to another episode of LMS Cast. I'm joined by my friend Aaron Edwards. He's from DocsBot AI. That's DocsBot.ai. Go check this out. This is not going to be your average episode where we talk about ChatGPT or some basic AI concepts, although we are going to talk about that stuff some. We're going to go deep. Aaron has been deep in the weeds with WordPress, AI, software development, solving problems for business owners. We're going to get into it today. This is going to be a fascinating episode. But first, welcome back on the show, Aaron.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Good to see you again.
I always love running into you because you're always up to like really interesting cutting edge things, whether it was NFT stuff in the past, you're
Right.
solving challenges with the media library and uploads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh, I've watched you over the past couple, maybe several years, launch DocsBot. So we're going to kind of focus on the AI component, both for WordPress professionals and agencies, but also for course creators. But first, just at a high level, what is DocsBot.ai?
Yeah, sure. Kind of the idea is, well, let me go back. I'll tell my story a little
Yeah.
bit with it. As you said, I just love playing with the latest new technology. So obviously, as this generative AI stuff started coming to the forefront, I was just diving in and building things, playing around with it, learning the latest tech and stuff like that. Whether it was images, and I know we talked about in the previous episode, and now DocSpot. And kind of what I started out is this new technique called retrieval augmented generation. So, like ChatGPT dropped in end of 2022, I think, and kind of it like wowed everyone. Obviously, like we're like, oh my gosh. But people quickly realized that like what hallucinations were. So these AI models are trained to be like super, super helpful and great assistants, so much so that they'll just make stuff up to make you happy, you know. So there's kind of a new in that time during that fall, there's kind of a new technique, some papers and things that have come out where people had realized that, okay, if you provide like ChatGPT with context, for example, you paste in um, a, a page of text or whatever about your product or something like that. You paste that in there, and then you ask a question about that content that you pasted in. So now it has like facts to kind of ground its answers. So that way, it can actually like provide like a accurate, valid answer by summarizing or extracting information from that text that you pasted in as context. So that's kind of what this new technique called retrieval augmented generation is. And so I just kind of was playing with that, and I thought this would be really cool, just as a proof of concept and to learn myself, is to build a chat bot that was trained on all the WordPress documentation. So I went and I like built like a web crawler that went and crawled all the documentation pages on WordPress.org, whether it's the developer side or like the user kind of side, all that kind of stuff. And then fed that into like it's called a vector database, which is just a way to kind of store that training data using AI embeddings, it's called, which is a way to do semantic search. So that if you search for like you give a question and it's able to identify text that may not have the exact same words in the question, but able to identify pieces of text that are the same like semantic meaning or close semantic meaning. So basically, that way you can transform a user's question into an actual whatever the most relevant pieces of documentation are to answer that question. And so I launched that, and it was called ChatWP, and it's still online. It's let me see if I remember the URL even. It's wpdocs.chat. And that's still like a free tool that's out there. Ask me anything about WordPress. And so the kind of idea of that was, actually, I'll share my screen, right? Is that all right?
Yeah, and if you're listening to this on the podcast, just head on over to the Lifter LMS YouTube channel and look for Aaron Edwards, and you'll find what we're looking at here.
Yeah. So wpdocs.chat. So just a simple chat interface, where you could ask like questions about WordPress, and then it goes, and then from that training data, it's able to provide like output and examples and things like that, even like code snippets and stuff that it's learned from the documentation. So that was kind of my learning experience and proof of concepts. And then what I did is people like were super excited about it. So I slapped a little a waitlist sign up form at the bottom of the page, and I said, hey, if you're interested in this for your business, let me know. And I just put a little survey there, like what are like the key features that you need, that kind of thing. If you're trying to use this for your own business. And I got a lot of like good responses on that, like a good wait list, and thought, all right, this is kind of like somewhat proven that there's some desire, for businesses to have something like this. And so I spent a month working nights all night, to put out DocsBot. So that was the product, which has been going well. It's grown a lot. It's my full-time job now. It's been more than a year and a half. And basically what we do is we make it super easy for businesses to train a custom chat support. It can be used internally, like for your team, to be able to get answers quickly from your existing documentation files, SOPs, that kind of thing. It can be used, some of our customers use it for the classic content generation or repurposing. So they have their chatbot trained with all their marketing content or whatever, and they can use that to kind of generate ad copy or different things like that. Or if they're agency, they might have a chatbot trained for each of their clients, and they'll use that for content repurposing. A lot of different use cases.
So what was a surprise to you as people started using it? Like who was like the main group, and then what were some surprising use cases that started popping up?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, and this is really what led it to it being a success, is somehow some Japanese Twitter tech influencer found it like from the chatbot, like in Japanese, and just like shared a video of it, answering questions in Japanese. And that went totally viral in Japan. It was so crazy. I like woke up in the morning and suddenly I had like 100 support tickets in Japanese, and my servers are crashing. And I was getting all these signups and things like that. Really stress testing it. So it's like, what is going on? Yeah, so it went viral in Japan, which is pretty crazy. So still probably maybe a third of my customers are Japanese. And that really kind of led me down the path of doing the work that kind of sets us apart from a lot of our competitors, and that making sure that it's very like multilingual and compatible with non-English languages. Most of all the AI announcements and benchmarks and all that stuff that you see online and all the hype, it's all English. Like you don't actually like realize it that okay, yeah, this tiny model that's like amazing, that like Llama or whatever, that Llama 3 or whatever, that Meta put out, sounds like so amazing, but you realize, oh, it's only like trained on like the 4 most common like Western languages, and the benchmarks suck on other languages. So that's been a really big thing, like from prompt optimization on the back end to making sure it like can detect languages properly and answer in whatever the language that the user asks questions, that kind of thing. It's taken a lot of like work, and even ongoing as I add new features, making sure that it works for all those use cases,
Tell us more about like the training data or the source pages. So for example, if I'm an agency, I may have a bunch of case studies and service offerings and a bunch of blog posts about how I approach my agency work or my clients. Or maybe I'm a podcaster and I have a lot of podcast episodes, or I have a product that has support library of content? Like,
Yeah.
how do people think about source pages and what could be sources? And at what point, how much source content do you need for this to get really valuable?
Yeah. So that's kind of like one of the harder things that we do is like the actual like code to create these like chatbots and do the retrieval augmented generation. And that's all open source. There's all kinds of like things that you can do and probably spin that up if you're a developer in just a few hours, something that kind of working as a proof of concept. But really the hard part is like figuring out how to take like real world data that businesses have, whether it's course content, as you mentioned, documentation, crawling a website, all that kind of thing, and transforming that into something that the bot understands and is able to use to answer questions accurately, without hallucinations. So we developed a lot of different source pages or ways to import information to your bot. So whether it's like uploading document files, PDFs, Word docs, PowerPoint, Excel, whatever it is, each of those things, we have to have different logic for how we parse that and how we divide it up into pieces that that the LLM, the large language model AI, can understand. So there's a lot of work in that. You can train it just with like FAQs that are simple to answer. You can have it crawl your entire website, like sitemap, that kind of thing, and connect it to tons of cloud sources, to your Notion, Confluence, Salesforce, Gitbook, places where you already have documentation stored, or if you're using like Zendesk or Help Scout or Intercom, Freshdesk, like a lot of these popular like support tools that maybe you have your knowledge base in, or you have your previous customer support history tickets in there. You can use all that to train your bot so that it can answer questions into the future. So we're always adding like new data sources. A fun one that I worked on last month is YouTube.
Yeah,
you're mentioning that you have all these YouTube videos, right?
Right.
So being able to like train your bot just by dropping in a YouTube video URL or like a URL to a playlist of up to 100 different videos, and then it goes through and actually had to. This is the hard part. Like YouTube does not like scraping, so it's literally like people don't realize that's the hard part. I had to use like a whole network of residential proxies, so it's actually going through like people's home computer to scrape the subtitles from YouTube and then use that to train the bot so that you can chat with your YouTube videos. And even as you're chatting with them, it like provides like source links to where it got the answer. So it'll actually link to the correct second in the video where it pulled that answer from, which is kind of fun.
Very cool. In terms of humans potentially being concerned about, well, I don't want this AI to speak for me. Like what are the options in terms of just like cut it loose and let it talk to anybody versus a human reviews before it gets communicated? Like, how do you think about that moderation aspect?
Yeah, I think, and a lot of our customers, they're using it for frontline customer support, so tier 1. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, first of all, like if you have a business, that customers never read the documentation, right?
Right. A lot of our support is like, here's the link to the document.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Like that's whatever, 75 or something % of the average company support is like, here's the link to the document where we answer that question for you, And in the previously there'd be things like search tools and stuff to try to identify that, to try to prevent tickets being created, deflection, we call it. But why not have like the same thing that Google does now when you Google something and it gives an AI answer by looking at the top results and summarizing that into a succinct answer instead of having to go to all these pages and read and figure out how to answer your question. That's kind of what we do. We take all that existing information that you've already written at some point, or that's already been recorded at some point in your documentation or support history or whatever, or YouTube demo videos, whatever it may be, and provide like an instant, like quick answer to them that's grounded in that truth of your training data, and also provides links to where it got that information so they could click out and and verify that if they want to or whatever. So yeah, that's like one side of it. And I think that these models are definitely well proven to be good enough for that kind of tier one support. And I'm surprised like what it can answer too. So even like my bot is trained on all my like developer documentation for APIs and things like that. So I find myself like asking questions about how do I give me an example code for how I integrate my widget with Zendesk, and it literally like both reads like my documentation, but it's actually like performing logic and reasoning as well after reading that, just like a human would, to generate new answers. It's not just copying and pasting verbatim, which is pretty amazing that these AI models are capable of doing that reasoning. So that even kind of gets you more than what you'd say is the tier one support, because it's not just linking to documentation, but it's actually able to do some reasoning too.
That's very cool. I know one of the things that I think about when, looking at AI tools is cost, and we don't have to get into the specifics of your pricing because I know it might change.
Mm-hmm.
But as the better AI gets, it might require more resources, which could in theory make it more expensive, or you need a large training set. Like, how do you think about pricing and making it work for everybody? The business owner, you making sure it's a profitable venture. Like, how do you think about that?
Man, when I launched the same week that the Chat GPT API became available, which was great timing, right? But the cost for that, like even the old like 3.5 model, Chat GPT model, it would cost, I think, like 3 or 4 cents per question.
Okay.
Per user question. Now, like if you're getting like 10,000 questions a month or something, that adds up fast, right? But at the same time, if you compare that to hiring a support person to answer those, whatever, 70% of those 10,000 questions, that's still super cheap, right? But it was kind of a hard thing to factor in. And so what I actually did in the beginning is we did like bring your own API key. So you could actually put in your key from OpenAI like into our dashboard, and we'd save it like encrypted and use that at cost. So instead of like reselling credits or something like that, like some of our competitors do with a markup, we just basically at cost, for the actual processing. And what's amazing is in less than 2 years, the price for how much power you get, like from the AI model, has literally dropped more than 100 times. It's
wow.
It's been crazy. And as a business who's like trying to figure out like my pricing models and things like that, and how to charge, that's been great, both for my customers who are like bringing their own key, but now I'm able to provide access like included to make it simpler for people to get started. They don't have to have their own key, so like I think it was said that like if you're building products on AI, like it's changing so fast and its capabilities are changing so fast, you need to be building like on the cutting edge, to where right now it's like seems super expensive or super like impossible for it to do, because it's just changing every 2 to 3 months. It's like a new model comes out, 2 to 3 times price drop. It's amazing.
Help us understand like the models in the background. Like, are you leveraging OpenAI? Are you leveraging Llama? A combination of stuff? Like, how does it? Like, what powers all this?
Yeah, right now we're using only OpenAI models, just because they have the best like developer ecosystem and things like that. We are playing with other models like Gemini and Llama. Maybe, like I said, there's still weaknesses there for other languages. So that's one of the things that we have to test heavily, is we want to support having a chatbot in Japanese, right? And that it's going to be able to, no matter what language the user asks a question, that it's able to still find the right documentation, even though maybe your documentation is in English. If someone asks a question in Japanese, it should be able to use AI to find the relevant documentation and provide an accurate answer to the user. And so for that, you need some of these larger models that have much more training data from other languages than English. So right now, that's the GPT-4o. That's kind of like our workhorses. So include like for free, like along with your plan. And that works for almost all use cases, and it's super fast and it's super good at multilingual as well. And then if you want like much more advanced reasoning, like to where it can maybe like do some custom coding and things like that as part of its answers, then you could jump up to the full like GPT-4o model, which has dropped down in price substantially too. It still costs less than 1 cent per question, more like 0.5 really. So super cost effective, and they just keep getting more and more powerful,
Could you describe to the layman, just to kind of highlight the rate of change with AI, like what's the difference with 4.0 in OpenAI versus like 3.5 or Turbo or whatever came before?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's like proprietary, so they don't tell us like all the technical details. You can kind of infer. There's been a lot of new inventions. So first of all was just like the amount of data it's trained on, right? They kind of call that parameters, like how many parameters. That's the size of the model. And so like you had like GPT-2, I think, and then GPT-3, which is like the first ones that had like an API. If you were really lucky, you could get a key to use that one. And that's what some of the early like content creation things used. And then 3.5 was basically they took that same model and they did what's called RLHF, which is basically they had humans write a bunch of like, okay, here's the message, and then here's like what a good response is for that. And so they hired armies of people in Africa and other third world countries that speak English and other data set online to kind of do that reinforcement learning on top of the existing model, which is basically where the invention of ChatGPT came from. So instead of being something where you had to figure out these weird ways of prompting it crazily to where it like completes like what you started, now you can just like give any kind of instruction and it just knows how to follow that instruction and provide a good output. So that didn't really change the size of the model. It just made it much more useful to the average user. And then you had the next big jump in model size, and that was GPT-4. And they say that went from like GPT-3 is probably something like 400 or 500 billion parameters. I think they estimate maybe like 300 or 400 billion parameters. And GPT-4 is probably like closer to like 2 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's after like being pruned and cleaned up and that kind of stuff. It's more like a tenfold increase, in size. And so that's why it's so much more expensive and slower, because it's got to run on a whole cluster of $20,000 GPUs, because it uses so much memory to do all that kind of stuff. And then but on top of that, then they're able to do what's called distillation, which is where you take that big model and you pull out by using like the reinforcement learning and things like that, training what's the most useful parts to you. So it may not have like the widespread knowledge from all that training data it pulled in, but all the things that people most commonly ask, or most commonly use it for, logic, it kept only those parts. So you can have a 10 times smaller model that was distilled from the big one, just pulling out the most useful things. And that's what GPT-4o Mini is, which is like their most cost-effective model. It's super, super fast, super inexpensive, but still very powerful, even in other languages.
That's awesome. And Aaron, while I've got you, an AI expert and who's great at teaching and communicating this stuff, help me understand the buzz around two concepts. I'm not sure if they're related or not, but one is having a large context window, and the other is chain of thought reasoning. What are those?
Okay. They're not like necessarily related, but the context window is basically like how much text or video or whatever the input, how
Okay.
much the AI model can handle at once.
'Cause if you're using ChatGPT, sometimes you're like, you try to copy paste and it's too long or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing. And that's kind of why we do, like, what my business does is called retrieval augmented generation. It's like when it was GPT, context window was 4,000 tokens,
Okay.
um, which a token is just like a piece of text. Um, like the average word is like 4 tokens, I think, if you think about that. And so you can imagine, okay, you can only post roughly around 1,000 words or whatever into there as part of your question. And also that usually includes the response too. So there's a input context window and an output one, how much text it can generate. And so that kind of limits you, like how much you can put in, especially when you're trying to answer questions from your documentation. Like I just crawled your website and there is like what was it, like almost 2,000 URLs,
Yeah.
and all the content from that. That's a lot, right? You couldn't paste all that into ChatGPT to
Right.
ask questions about it, right?
But you
So
can
that's
with DocsBot.ai.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
because we pre-process all that into like getting rid of all the extra stuff and just keeping like the important chunks of text and trying to keep the chunks semantically relevant to where you're not cutting off information between them. And then when a user asks a question, we actually search to find the most relevant pieces, and that's what is put in the context window for the model. But there's been a lot of doubts if that's like the best technique as these context windows getting bigger. So now you have GPT 4.0, the context window is 128,000 tokens. So that's a big jump from 4,000, right? The problem is you got to pay for all those tokens.
Right.
Because the cost is like per token, and it's slightly less for the input versus the output, but still that adds up a lot. So you don't want every time you ask or a user asks a question to have to paste in that whole thing and pay for all that each time, And there are techniques around that, like OpenAI just last week announced prompt caching. And I know Google has that and Anthropic has that now too. They're a little bit harder to use, but basically if you're asking the same question, or at least the beginning of it, over and over multiple times in 5 to 10 minutes, then it actually caches a big chunk of that that's reused each time. And so by doing that, I think that you save like 50% on those tokens. So there are techniques around that, but still it's inefficient to paste everything in there. But it is really useful for some things. Like I love using Gemini. They have a 2 million token context window, which is huge. I mean, you can paste a whole book in there, right? And do like Q&A or summarization or whatever over the entire book without having to do what we do, like the RAG. And the same thing, like with Gemini, you can do like a video or a bunch of images all at once because their window is so big. It's expensive, but you can do like certain tasks that you couldn't do before. So we'll see. These context windows keep getting bigger and prices drop when they introduce things like caching. Like I think these like chatbots and things like this for our use case are going to get even more accurate because we'll be able to pass in even more information.
And how about chain of thought reasoning? Or is that like a bigger advance from autocomplete kind of, or how would you describe it? Because obviously we want like the AI to be as good or smarter than a human,
Right.
right?
Well, basically, like some people just like tells it to think carefully, and how to think.
Right.
Then it actually somehow does that internally before it gives an answer. So it'll be like something like, all right, divide the problem into 10 steps for how you'll solve it. And then think about if those are good steps for solving this particular problem. And then as you generate the output, compare it to these like rules to see if that's a good output, and it's not kind of like necessarily doing that internally. It's just like telling it how to think makes it think better.
Okay.
Which is weird, right? It's kind of like those hacks, kind of like where people just say, oh, if you say I'm going to get fired if you don't give a good answer, then it gives a better answer, you know?
Yeah.
These weird little quirks in the system that people like didn't realize. It's a little bit like that. So that's kind of what the chain of thought is you provide like a specific like prompt template like that, and then it can do a better job of more advanced like reasoning answers. And then what OpenAI did is they just released a new model called O1. I don't know
Okay.
if you've heard of that. And basically, what they did is they baked in that chain of thought into the model. So instead of having to prompt that each time, the model has actually been fine tuned with a whole bunch of examples of chain of thought. So
Oh,
like really advanced chain of thought prompt, and then and then the output of how it would develop that, and then what the final output shown to the user should be. And then they passed in whatever 100,000 examples of that they had generated or compiled, and used that to fine tune the model. So now it kind of does that chain of thought internally on its own. So that gives you much more accurate like things, especially if you're wanting to do things like math or coding. Or it's great if you're trying to do something like, okay, this is here's my guidelines for how this entire like proposal should be laid out, the outline and all the things and the logic and everything. Now I pasted in all the information, now I want you to compile that into this beautiful report that's 10 pages long, right? So instead of trying to just one shot that using that O1 model, it's actually does all that thinking behind the scenes. And that means it's slow because it'll literally say, you see, it's like thinking about this, considering this, whatever, it can take 5 minutes sometimes for really advanced job that you give it to for it to do all that internal thinking before it spits out the final product. So it's really cool, but it's not like great for like customer support or chatbots to where you want to answer quickly. But it is very good for things that require a lot of like complexity and thinking and reasoning to generate a good output.
and that 5 minutes may be like a year of human time, right?
Right. Yeah.
um, let's talk about something really for the course creator folks.
Yeah.
There's there's courses and content, but there's also coaching. So let's say somebody has been YouTubing on a given topic for years,
Mm-hmm.
or they've been podcasting on it for years, or blogging about it, or they have a course library on their website. How could they use DocsBot AI to answer questions, but also in more of a coaching context? Like, so essentially, like a subject matter expert could turn their body of work into a sort of like a digital mentor or coach.
Yeah. That's actually a great idea. I really have been wanting to like play around with use cases for LMS. Because as you mentioned, I think that is really like cool way of doing it, different than just customer support or whatever, being able to like chat with or have that kind of conversation with the course content. So there's the one thing to where obviously it'd be like user initiated. It'd be really fun to play around with ways to kind of have the chatbot initiate things.
Right. Like take
Whether
somebody
it's
down a process of like, what's your biggest challenge? And
right, yeah, that kind of thing, and perform more like reasoning things, even generating like quizzes on the fly or something like that would be kind of cool.
or even prescribing, like sometimes it's a problem. It becomes a problem when you actually have too much content, and then a student or a client comes in and they're kind of overwhelmed. So like one of the things is just like helping people find the stuff that's most related to their biggest opportunity or challenge.
Yeah, and that we do very efficiently, as it is. But one of the cool things about DocsBot is you can like embed it anywhere, So we provide like a simple like chat widget that you can stick on your website, but we have like a full featured API. So we have people like we have WordPress plugin authors that have it like built into the dashboard of the plugin
That's pretty cool.
to where, yeah, so to where users can quickly like get an answer to a question about how to use the plugin. And you can even pass in like custom metadata. So the chatbot can know, okay, what page it's on,
Okay.
like what settings page or different things like that. Or you can pass in just random metadata, like obviously the user's name, so it can personalize responses, or maybe like what plan they're on, that kind of stuff, the links to get to certain pages that are like to manage their account or manage their orders in WooCommerce or whatever it may be. So you can kind of pass all that in as metadata, as context to the chat, so that the bot is able to answer user questions, not just from your documentation, but from personalized metadata about the user and their state in your application. So something like that would be really useful, like for Lifter LMS or whatever, like in courses, so it can know like what section of the course it's on, like maybe what they've completed, different things like that, as well as being able to actually chat with the video content or chat with the course content, that kind of things.
Yeah, this concept of an AI tutor is a big deal. Khan Academy, that guy, I know he's done some stuff with his body of work, but in the LMS space, we're all kind of chasing that AI tutor, which is ideally could be proactive, not just reactive, kind of like we talked about with coaching versus retrieval or reacting.
Right. Yeah.
We can't do an AI, or sorry, go ahead. Did you have something else?
No, go ahead.
We can't do an AI podcast without addressing like fear or concern with AI. Like, how do you think about the future? Are you worried about AI taking over? For me, it seems like, I mean, what happens when AI becomes more intelligent than the smartest human? I would argue maybe that's already happened. Like, how do you think about the future, particularly with the rate of change?
I'm not that old, but I feel like I've lived through
yeah,
at least 3 or 4 major technology waves where people said this is going to destroy society or whatever it may be, take all our jobs, And I think the pattern has always been the same. Like with new technology, new tools, it just makes us more efficient. Obviously, but I mean, just like any other tool, whether it's technology, whether it's a gun, whether it's money, it just like accelerates people's base tendencies, like for good or bad, things we use for good or bad. For like AI, obviously, like the fear is, it's gonna like, well, obviously the fear is like replacing jobs. And I'm kind of torn on this because literally my business right now is like to help replace jobs, kind of. I mean, if you have like a support bot that can handle like 70% of your tickets, granted, it's probably like tier 1, So those are the people that are going to get eliminated first, the ones with the lowest like capability or education or that kind of things, if that happens. But also it makes lives a lot easier for the other workers, because they don't have to answer those boring, repetitive questions or tasks or things like that.
And if you're using it for pre-sales, like you might actually start selling more product, which is going to require more support because people don't have to wait to get an answer about, will this work for me and my
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. Or other marketing use cases. Like I use my custom trained chatbot for when I get like a lead, like someone signs up, like gives me their email or whatever on the site. I actually have the chatbot go and read their website, their business website. And then use that, pass it to my trained chatbot and say, okay, I want you to draft this like really bespoke custom email that's recommending all the specific ways my product can be used for their business.
Nice.
And so it writes like a totally personally way better than I ever could with an hour of research, right? That's giving them specific things like, oh, here's how you can use a chatbot for your car wash network, you know?
Right. Yeah. Super contextual.
Yeah. So it allows like mass personalization. So I think it's going to unlock more things. I think just like other technology, I think for the most part is just going to be making users more efficient, making them able to achieve more. I think obviously it will replace some jobs, but it creates new ones, just like we've seen with every new technology. So I think instead of like spending your time like being scared, I think it's a lot better to spend your time learning.
Yeah. Play in the playground.
Yeah, the way you succeed in this world of ours, and this has been true for a long time, is learning how to learn. So that means staying on top of whatever the latest technology or developments are, playing with that, figuring out how to leverage that and use it in your workflows, in your business, in your career. There's that classic quote that your job might not be replaced by AI, but it'll be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI.
Yeah.
And I love that quote because I think it's very true, at least right now. Maybe someday we get to that point to where like the AI takes over everything and no one has to work anymore or something. I don't know. I don't really see that happening. I think the same pattern is going to replay itself. Like things get more efficient, new jobs that no one ever imagined, are created. So I'm a bit of an accelerationist in that.
Absolutely. Can you, final thing, prepare that demo where people can talk to the AI? And so as Aaron's getting that ready, like think about this idea that somebody could talk to your website just using voice, potentially in multiple languages.
Yeah. So this is very rough. This is like my weekend project that I've been hacking together. But I don't know if you knew, but OpenAI just released their advanced voice mode, like both in ChatGPT Plus, where you can play around with it. But last week they released an API for it, so you can actually have the real-time like conversations with AI. And what makes this different than before is before you would have to, like if you asked a question, it would have to first run it through a model to turn that audio into text, right? Then it would pass that text to ChatGPT, which would provide an answer in text, and then it would have to turn that text back into voice again. So there's a whole lot of latency there, like because you're doing like 3 different conversions, and so like a lot of big gaps and things like that to make it just really not feel like a phone call or not feel like a real person. So their new real-time API, which they just released. So I was just playing with connecting that to DocsBot because I want to create like voice agents. So you can connect your phone number to it, or you can add a little widget like this that I have right here on your website to talk like to a human sounding representative. Obviously there's a lot of like UX things to solve. Right now there's like a bit of a pause while it's looking up data to answer a question, which I need to fill in those pauses, but I'll give you a quick demo.
Hola, ¿cómo puedo ayudarte hoy?
Can you speak in English?
Absolutely, I can speak English. How can I assist you today?
What kinds of questions can you answer?
I can help with questions related to DocsBot testing, from features and troubleshooting to integration.
Okay, I want to know about the pricing plans. How about the hobby plan? How many pages does that come with?
The hobby plan for DocsBot includes up to 1,000 source pages. If you need more detail.
Oh, that's great. Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, that was awesome.
Hello again. Regarding your question, let me check if you can train your bot using YouTube videos. Give me a moment. Good news. You can indeed train your DocsBot using YouTube videos. This feature allows your chatbot to provide
All right,
answers
talk
based.
faster. It's too slow.
You can definitely train your DocsBot using YouTube videos. This feature lets your chatbot
All
provide.
right, thank you.
Glad to help. If you have more questions, feel free to ask.
So that's kind of a rough demo.
That's awesome. Thanks for giving us a glimpse into the future. It's amazing, Aaron, what you've built over at DocsBot AI. So go check that out. If you're listening to this episode, that's DocsBot.ai. And how would you say, Aaron, was the best way for somebody to get started? They've listened to this episode. They're excited.
Yeah.
What should they do to kind of
Well, we have a free plan. You don't even need a credit card. So you can just click the big build your chatbot right now. And then you can super simply, without even paying, like you can add in like a URL to your site or a few different things. Like there's obviously limits on how you can train your bot with the free plan. But if you need more than that, you want to try all the features, we do have like a money back guarantee. So we'll give you 14 days to give it a try. And if it's not good for you, we'll just give you a full refund. But for most people, it takes like less than 5 minutes to have like a working chatbot for customer support or internal knowledge or whatever. So it's pretty magical.
That's awesome, Aaron. Thank you for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for
We're going to have
me,
to catch up in another year and see what's going on here. And the way the rate this is accelerating, it might have to be before a year.
Yeah.
So,
no problem.
I'm super impressed in the way you innovate and play in the playground of technology and provide business tools is really inspiring. So thank you for coming. Thanks for coming back on the show.
All right.